Somebody asked me today to do a video on pouring new bases and new foundations, which I don't really do a lot of foundation work, but I do make a lot of these bases for these old mortise and tenon tablets. Basically, when I find these tablets, I try to find the base that belong to it also. A lot of times they're either missing or the base is in such bad shape I can't reuse it. In this instance, this stone, I believe, was at the old cemetery. And what I'm finding is a lot of the stones that were at the old cemetery were moved over to the new cemetery, and many of them don't have bases anymore. So I don't know if the bases were unusable or if they just didn't move them or what. So typically with new bases like this, I have a set of forms. I've got like 3 sets of them. And I'll usually take those apart and mix and match pieces to make the size form I need. Every once in a while I'll have to make a new form for a particular stone if it happens to be wider or narrower than what I already have forms for. But my rule of thumb for these is that, let me see if I can, for this area right here on the side of the stone, right there, I have a minimum of 2 inches. So sometimes you'll see videos where there's more space there from the stone to the edge of the concrete. Sometimes there's less, like in this one. It's a much smaller stone, didn't require a lot more concrete on the edges, so I kept that pretty tight there. Front and back of the stone, pretty much every stone is the same, 3.5 to 4 inches, depending on what I can get with the pieces that I have. I don't like to keep cutting 2x6s and 2x8s up to make new forms, so I just work with what I got, if that kind of makes sense. So 4 inches in front of the stone, 4 inches in back of the stone, roughly, give or take, and no less than 2 inches on the sides. Now, typically, what I like to do is make sure that I have at least 6 inches of concrete below grade. And the reveal above grade can vary depending on what it looks like around that headstone, what the soil is like. Usually these older graves like this aren't going to settle much more, so you're not going to see a lot of sinking in this new base. But what I've heard is some states and some areas require what I think is bizarre, 4 and 5 foot deep foundations for headstones. And if you live in an area where you know that is a requirement, leave me a comment, because all that really is doing is making sure that it's going to be really hard to readjust that stone when that foundation sinks, because that foundation is going to sink. It doesn't matter if you're in a cemetery that has vaults or these old graves that didn't have vaults. There's always going to be some movement in the grave. So the majority of the problems with these old graves is that they were just wooden caskets placed in the ground. The wood rots over time. The casket collapses. The grave moves. The stone is there. Everything moves towards the grave, and it starts to sink. Well, since we have vaults now, concrete vaults, that is not as much of a problem, but it still does happen. Vaults, although you'd like to think that they seal up perfectly, they don't. There's water and soil that will work into the crack and go into the vault around the casket, and that will cause some movement in the grave. There's always settling when you dig a hole. That's why 200 years after people were buried, you can go over their grave with a GPR and see that there's a disturbance. So those graves will take a long time to settle. They always do. It always results in monument movement. So to me, the thicker concrete foundations is not the answer. I have heard one valid argument for that, in that for many years there's a sexton up in northern Michigan that has been putting foundations in, and he digs a hole like 4 or 6 inches square all the way down to the bottom or to the top of the vault, and pours his foundation all the way down to there, so that that foundation rests on the vault, so it comes up in a 6 inch square shaft, and then the concrete foundation for the monument is on top of that. That is a great idea. That's probably something that works. I hope that you never have to exhume somebody where that has happened, because that will be a major pain in the butt. And then you've got this huge long piece of concrete that you can't do anything with because that person is being moved to somewhere else, or what have you. So anyways, that's kind of the long story on how I make new bases. I'll probably put out a video in the spring or in the summer when I'm actually doing a base that explains my whole process, but that's pretty much how I do it.